Liam PARO from Australia comes to Subriel Matias's backyard in Puerto Rico and captures the IBF 140-pound belt in a major upset. Now, some folks are saying that Subriel was exposed in this fight. I disagree. I think that this fight was won and lost in each man's training camp, and I will circle back to that at the end of this video. But let's take a look at a couple of themes that were evident in this fight. Now, my disclaimer is, unfortunately, I did not get to see the fight live, and I also cannot find the full fight posted on YouTube. So I'm basing my assessment off the highlights that DAZN posted. So obviously these are edited by the DAZN, but nevertheless I think it can give you a decent overview of what I saw. So I think there's two main themes to this fight of Matias versus PARO. One theme is volume, and the second theme is distance, and these two themes kind of play off of each other. So let's look at volume. Now, we know that Subriel Matias is a volume power puncher, and that puts him in kind of a unique category, because typically fighters who are power punchers have a lower output because they're looking for that combination power to lead up to a, maybe a 1 or 2 punch power KO. Such as a Tank Davis, who really conserves his output and hones in on being precise with his power shots. Precise in terms of timing and the target. Matias, on the other hand, overwhelms his opponents by throwing volume power punches, typically a lot of a little bit inside medium range, hooks. He throws tons of hooks to the body and to the head, and he does it with this very regular tempo. Now, interestingly enough, Matias doesn't seem to put a lot of variation on the power of each shot. Often what fighters will do to kind of trick or set up their opponent is they will, say, throw something soft, and then the same punch really hard, or they'll vary that tempo up so that their opponent can't get a read on when that power shot's coming. But Matias he's just relentless with his volume, typically, and that, combined with the fact that these are hard shots, that is what overwhelms his opponents. Now, on the other hand, PARO used a lot of volume without taking into consideration his power. I think he knows he's not maybe a power shot fighter, but he knows he can just up his volume, and that's what he did in this fight. So now we have someone who, in PARO, who's just going to try to use a ton of volume to win as many rounds as possible. So now, what he needed to do, and what he did, was PARO also controlled the distance in order to be able to get off with his volume and not let Matias up his volume. So let's take a look at the distance that Matias likes to fight at. In spite of him being kind of a lanky build fighter, he doesn't favor the outside with lots of straight jabs and right hands, as you might think somebody with that build would do. And he's also not a complete inside fighter where he likes to stand right up close and throw tons of inside uppercuts and super tight hooks. Instead, Matias is a little more just barely inside middle distance, because he likes to stand more or less stationary and fire tons of hooks back, like it's always left, right, or right, left, but it's just alternating hooks to the head and the body. I say he's just slightly inside middle distance because a lot of middle distance type fighters will come in, fire their shots, move out to avoid shots, and then come back in. But Matias doesn't play that game at all. So let's look at the tactics that PARO used to maintain the distance that PARO wanted. In the early rounds, he used that pawing jab that I'm not a big fan of, but because PARO is a southpaw and he's facing Matias, who's a righty, he can use that pawing jab because it's going to sort of cancel with Matias's jab. And he did use that effectively because every now and again he would post off of Matias and, as we say, go out the back door, which means PARO would post on Matias's like head shoulder area and then rotate out sort of counterclockwise away from Matias's power punch. Now that forces Matias to have to reset, turn and face to reinitiate the next exchange. But that's how PARO stayed away from Matias and didn't allow him to close the distance in that moment. Another tactic PARO used early on was that he would simply just push and shove Matias off him when PARO was done punching, so Matias couldn't again initiate his combinations. Now, again, this is a tactic I really don't like. I call pushing somebody off you, like, that's sub-amateur in my opinion, because a decent trainer will chastise their fighter for shoving the other person off of them, especially in sparring. Now the old adage is, well, look, the same amount of energy you just used to push that person off of you, you could have used that energy to throw a punch. But as sub-amateur as that is, we'll give PARO a free pass on pushing Matias off of him because it's a world title fight and he just needed to do what he needed to do to keep Matias off him in terms of not being able to set at Matias's favored distance. Third thing that PARO did to negate that distance that Matias wanted to stand at was that PARO clinched a lot in the later rounds, either with overhooks or underhooks. As soon as Matias got into that range, that's what PARO resorted to. Now, he did get himself in a little bit of trouble because he would throw rabbit punches from the clinch. Rabbit punches are dangerous because you're punching the back of the other person's head. So now, in the 7th round, I didn't see the footage of this, but in the 7th round, the referee deducted a point from PARO for the rabbit punching. I can't say whether that was justified or not. I'll assume it was because I think it was in the 6th round, I did see him throw at least one rabbit punch. But either way, number one, the ref is right to issue a hard warning and deduct a point, or just sometimes maybe just deduct a point if it's blatant, because this hit behind the back of the head is incredibly dangerous and should never be allowed. And in spite of what Joe Rogan thinks, it should not be allowed in MMA either. That said, that point deduction in the end didn't determine the outcome of the fight. The scores were 115, 112 twice, and then 116, 111 once. So with that 7th round point deduction, that means that 2 judges saw it 8 rounds for PARO, 4 rounds for Matias, and the other judge saw it 9 rounds for PARO, 3 rounds for Matias. So, it's no easy feat to come to the champion's backyard and walk away with a decision victory, but I think those scorecards reflect the fact that it was pretty clear that PARO won that fight, and had it been close, I think it's quite possible they would have called it a draw, or even maybe had the audacity to swing it in the champion's favor. But the 8 and 9 rounds being awarded to the guy coming from Australia indicates to me that he really and truly overwhelmed Matias in this fight. Now, let's look at what Matias didn't do that he should have done. There's a couple of things I can see. One is that he needed to punch with PARO. instead, what he was doing quite often was just doing his double shell guard and allowing PARO to get off. And then when he wanted to return the favor, PARO shifted the distance by either circling himself out, pushing MATIAS off him, or by clinching. So now MATIAS doesn't have that inside middle distance that MATIAS wants. So the point is there, he should have been punching at PARO while PARO was punching at him instead of shelling up. The second thing MATIAS did not do that would have helped him out was MATIAS did not throw punches off of his very skillful defensive moves. So for example, when he was standing in close range and PARO was firing shots at him, MATIAS would occasionally make nice little slip motions, but he wouldn't come back with a counter shot. Same thing, sometimes MATIAS would weave under PARO's shots, and again, he did not fire to the body in those moments. Now, it's a cliche in boxing, make them miss, make them pay. But any real boxing trainer would chastise their fighter if they make a defensive move and do not come back immediately with a counter shot, because it takes such skill to make somebody else miss their punch that you absolutely should fire back a counter shot in that moment. Otherwise, it's a wasted moment for you. You don't get any points by making somebody miss, and you don't do any damage to the other person by making them miss, other than maybe you discourage them just a little bit, or maybe their ego takes a tiny little knock because they missed you. But the point is, you got to, they're out of position in that moment when you make them miss. They're out of position to fire back at you, so it behooves you to fire back at them instead. So MATIAS, being that sort of inside middle distance volume power puncher, he just never pulled the trigger for himself to get going. For a fighter like MATIAS, it doesn't really matter if he's fighting a righty or a lefty, because of the distance he's at. It almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which stance the other person's in, because they're basically at a slightly bent arm's length from MATIAS. So MATIAS likes to fight a little more squared off than at an oblique angle. So I said I think this fight was won and lost in the training camp, and here's why. In spite of what the announcers said during the 12th round, that both fighters must be exhausted, it didn't look to me that PARO was exhausted at all. In fact, it didn't really look like MATIAS was exhausted, but just the volume and the pace that PARO kept from bell to bell, PARO was in tremendous shape for this fight. It's apparent to me that he simply hunkered down with his team and they went to work. Not only was he in terrific condition, but it's apparent he put himself through some hard sparring, and that's because he was willing to make it grindy and dirty. Not dirty, but the pushing, the shoving, the clinching. He was perfectly at home with that, and the only way you get comfortable with all of that, clinching, shoving, pushing, holding, you get comfortable doing that in the sparring session. You can't get comfortable doing that with your what we call floor work, right? Like hitting the heavy bag. Heavy bag's not doing that stuff to you. So that takes a different type of toughness, especially when we're talking about a little more grappling being mixed into the boxing. It's a different type of conditioning. It's a different energy system that you're using, different muscles that you're using in a different way. So it's something that needs to be practiced. You can't just tell yourself in your mind, oh, well, when they hold me, I'm going to do this, or you got to practice it. And by contrast, it was also apparent to me that I don't think MATIAS put in a tough enough training camp for PARO. Now, the reasons for that could be, in the end, only he and his camp know. But here's what were sort of the tells to me. One, he wasn't willing to punch with PARO when PARO was punching, which is absolutely what he needed to do. And again, that's something you can only get used to during repeated tough sparring sessions. It's absolutely uncomfortable first when you say you're first starting your training camp and your trainer's yelling at you to punch with your sparring partner who's punching at you, punch with them. It just feels so strange because you're completely discombobulated for, say, the first session when you're trying to do that. But over time, with repetition, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but it gets less uncomfortable. Because when you punch with somebody while they're punching at you, you're punching a little bit blind out of necessity. And it's almost as if these exchanges have to become a little bit instinctive, where your body almost knows what to do more than you intellectually know what to do. There's too much going on for you to intellectualize. Oh, well, he's going to do that, or she's going to do that, and then I'm going to do this. You can't have any of that going on. Those moments, it's all sort of just automatic reflex. And again, only way to get there is to put yourself through it. It sucks, but you got to do it during your training camp. And so here we have the issue of the volume power puncher being under condition. Well, that's just a recipe for disaster, because he's not a sort of pick 'em and shoot 'em type fighter. So the question is, Matias knows what type of fighter he is. His coaches know what type of fighter he is. What happened where that did not get taken care of in their training camp? Now, I'll base my hypothesis on the interview with Matias's coach afterwards. I don't remember his name, but I think the journalist called him Panda. Not sure. In any case, he alluded to the fact that Matias taking this fight in Puerto Rico, defending his belt in his hometown, was a detriment due to there being too many distractions. So now that's very interesting, kind of a giveaway, because you have hometown advantage, right? You're fighting in your backyard in front of your crowd who's going to be cheering for you. So you have all that positive energy behind you. So for Matias's coach to admit that was actually a detriment due to distractions tells me, well, okay, so did you guys choose to run your entire camp with Matias staying at home, living at home, and training at his own gym? Because that's kind of an obvious mistake, right? Obviously, his friends and family are there if he chose to stay at home, surrounded by friends and family. There's also, all the sort of local businesses, media, probably people with their little YouTube channels that want to get an interview. You got hundreds of people pulling at him, trying to get a piece of his time, number one. Number two, if he did in fact stay at home, all his buddies are around. They know that Subriel is the man of the hour. Subriel is their ticket to get into the club at night. He's their ticket to get, a free meal at this great restaurant. And so they're all going to be, they're supposedly his friends, but they're, unfortunately, a lot of these boxing friends or entourage who hype up the fighter are just simply there to go along for the ride while the getting's good, right? Now, I have no insight as to how Subriel ran his camp, but let's say they actually did go away, just, which I honestly think there's no excuse for him not sequestering himself. He's a world champion. Surely he's got a budget for training camp. Whether his manager's going to advance him or his promoter's going to advance him to cover the cost of a training camp out of town. you know, when you're at that level, it behooves you to do what you need to do in order to keep your title, right? So suck it up, take yourself out of the limelight, sequester yourself somewhere where you and your team can simply focus on getting down to business and putting in all the hard rounds that you needed to put in. Now, let's say on the other hand, maybe Subriel and his team did go out of town for camp. Well, if that's the case, then it seems to me like they took a few too many extra people who were the distractions during this camp. So that's just my hypothesis, but I can't come up with any other reason why Subriel put on the performance he did, because he did show me moments of brilliance. He did have his moments in that fight, like at least from the highlight reel showed him doing well in the 3rd round and the 6th round. Now I don't know what other rounds the judges gave him, but the fact that he was able to do that sort of overwhelm PARO in moments, but he wasn't able to sustain that, shows me that he didn't put enough work in training camp. Second tell that MATIAS had was right off the bat when PARO would quote unquote get the better of them, maybe in an exchange or pushing him off or setting the distance. MATIAS had this little habit of kind of clapping his gloves together, almost as if to sort of tell himself, hey, come on, let's go. And it's like he was trying to use that little gesture to turn himself on, but he never got the switch turned on fully where he could sustain his onslaught over a long enough duration to wear PARO down. Now, third tell that MATIAS just simply didn't put in the work were those defensive moves that he made without firing back, because in sparring his trainer should have chastised him that if he's going to make those moves, you better fire back in those moments. So it's just really unfortunate for MATIAS that he kind of not to take away from PARO, but MATIAS kind of gave away the fight in that he came in underprepared, so he wasn't able to put on his best performance. That's not to say that PARO couldn't have eked out a win even if MATIAS was at his best, but we got to give credit to PARO for putting in the hard work in training camp, because that was apparent. And so congratulations to Liam PARO for coming to Subriel MATIAS's backyard and walking away with a unanimous decision victory. That's not an easy thing to do. In closing, what do you think is next for Liam? What do you think is next for Subriel? Who do you want to see either man fight next? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for listening.